Well, good day and welcome to you. It is actually the halfway point of 2022. It's June 30th. So we're already on our way to 2023 at some point. So I hope you're having a great day wherever you are. My name is Gary Willing, and as always, I want to welcome you to Search for Signs. And just quickly point out, if you want to know more about this information, I do think the best thing to do is to investigate it for yourself. And you can do that by checking out the websites that I provided links for. I think they give you really good background information about what we talk about in some way, shape, or form, and in their own way. So hopefully you'll look into it. I also want to take the time to thank those people who commented in the last video. Ricardo, Mark, and Vanessa, thank you so much for taking the time to comment. But I do want to talk about something that's critically important to us right now, which is the environment, okay? Now, I know perhaps talking about the problems of humanity is not the most exciting thing that you can listen to on YouTube. But I hope that you will start to see how critical the time is in terms of solving the environment. But I want to point out something that you might not think about. I want to give you a couple things to think about when it comes to the environment, because nobody's talking about it like this. First and foremost, I think the problems of the world, such as the environment, are really evidence that we are one. Now, you probably have heard the term oneness before, or unity, or something like that effect, right? Perhaps have been told by somebody who has this mystical vision that we're all going to be holding hands one day, and that's evidence that we are one. But however it was presented to you, okay, you were either turned off by it or you saw it as a reality. But if you were turned off by the person who was telling you that we are all one, perhaps you thought it was a new age concept, I want to present this to you as perhaps evidence for you to look at scientifically that we are one. Okay, so the problems of the world, such as the environment, I'm saying are evidence that we are one. What do I mean by that? Well, the environment is affecting each and every one of us. If it was clean, if it was, there was no pollution, then of course the health of every single one of us would be much different than it is today, right? But the environment, because it's so polluted, because we're cutting down trees at an alarming rate, but especially the pollution, it is affecting each and every one of us without exception. So it doesn't matter how rich you are, how poor you are, what the color of your skin is, where you live in the world, that pollution is affecting each and every one of us in some way, shape, or form. It's making some of us sicker faster, but eventually it's going to make us all sick. But it's also for each and every one of us to do something about it. Now, the environment is one of Maitreya's biggest priorities. You would think it would be the biggest priority. It will eventually be the biggest priority of not only Maitreya and these masters, but humanity. And it will take the efforts of the masters and humanity working together to solve the problem in time before it's too late. Now, the reason why it's one of his biggest priorities is because there's something that needs to take place first in order for us to solve the environmental problem. And this is the other thing that you might not be thinking about. So if you're somebody who's deeply concerned about the environment, perhaps even marches for the environment, talks to everyone in their family and friends and coworkers about how important it is to solve the environment in some way, I am sure you're not hearing this from the news, you're not hearing this from people marching in the environment, you're not hearing it from people in your life. But the most important thing, according to Maitreya, that we need to do first is the principle of sharing. And the reason why it's important, let me explain this to you, is nations of the world must have a trustful relationship with each other in order for us to solve this problem. So it can't just be one or two nations or 90% of the nations out there doing something about the environment and the other 10% not doing anything. It's going to take every single nation doing something about it, and every single citizen in those nations doing something, whether it's a lot or a little, in order to solve the problem of the environment. So that's why trust amongst nations, and even trust amongst the individuals in those nations, has to be at a higher level than it is today, or we will never get the job done in time. Okay, now, Maitreya says without sharing, there could be no justice. Without justice, there could be no peace. Without peace, there could be no future. Of course, that could be looked at from the military view of it, that we have to have peace or we'll destroy ourselves because we have nuclear weapons. Of course, that's common sense. But what you might not be thinking is how that relates to the environment. And if we do not share the resources of the world and bring about justice amongst the nations, and bring about peace amongst the nations and trust, even if it's just a little bit of peace, that we will not solve the environmental problem in time. So, I think that problems of the world like the environment, are evidence that we are one, but I also think it's evidence that we have to bring about the principle of sharing in order to bring about trust amongst the nations to solve the problems. You see what I'm saying? Two things you might not be thinking about in relation to the environment. Now, the other thing I want to say, just on a practical level, okay, so, well, before I say that, as problematic and as destructive as climate change is, and these masters will tell you, if you could talk to the Master Jesus or the Master Kuthumi or Maitreya himself, they will tell you that climate change is definitely real, and it's 80%, and he says this in this article I'm about to read, it's 80% the result of man's destructive efforts not efforts, but destructive actions that are causing the environment to heat up in the way that it's doing. And it will eventually cause very, very serious problems. And it will eventually get to the point where if we don't do something about it, it'll be too late. But they will, each one of these masters would tell you, and this is the other thing that you're not hearing from environmentalists, is it's actually pollution that's the single biggest killer out there. It's the pollution that's causing the most destruction. But because it's as the masters call it, invisible peril, it's pollution that you can't see. It's because of nuclear radiation. We don't see it, we can't hear it, we can't taste it. We are seeing the effects of it, but we're not relating it back to nuclear radiation. And you don't have to look at it like this yet, but when Maitreya is out speaking in the way that he is, and he's talking about the environment and so forth, he's going to be talking about how dangerous the way that we are doing nuclear and we're processing nuclear power today is the most destructive thing that we're doing to the environment that people are totally unaware of. Even those people who are deeply, deeply concerned about the environment are totally unaware of the fact that that is the single biggest problem that we're doing. Now, on a practical level, if you're somebody who's starting to talk to your family and friends about the environment, and especially if you're living in the United States, you're going to eventually come across somebody who's saying there's no such thing as climate change. That is all a Democratic hoax, because it's politically charged at this time. I mean, the world is so divided in terms of thinking, right? I mean, that you can't help but see it on every level. But one of the major divisions is is climate change real or is it not? Should we do something about it or not? So you have the progressives that are trying to do something about climate change, of course, marching against it. More and more people every year are joining the ranks of those people who see the problems of climate change and are marching against it. And then, of course, you have the reactionary forces that are like the immovable object because it's against their profits. And they've convinced the reactionary forces of people out there that we don't need to do anything about it. There's no truth to any of this stuff, right? Now, what I found is, on a practical level, if you're talking to somebody who's in total denial about climate change, if you just shift gears and talk about the pollution, they don't have a comeback for you. And it's not about winning an argument. It's about convincing somebody how important it is that we do something about it. And we have to all kind of help change the hearts and minds of those who are totally in denial about some of these problems. But when I started talking about the pollution to people who are totally in denial about climate change, I've even had people come to me and say, nobody's ever talked to me about it like this. You know, you can see the evidence of pollution, even if it's just litter on the side of the highway, right? But you can see it in the air over major cities. And of course, when it comes to water pollution, none of us are willing to take a cup and go to the Hudson River in New York and just drink some of that water. You know what I'm saying? But it doesn't have to be the Hudson River. It could be the river in your town, right? Are you willing to go down there and just drink some of that water right out of the ground like that, or out of the river? Of course not. It's going to make you really, really sick. And then if you think about it even further, how much energy does it take and time and money and electricity even to clean the water enough to where it's just remotely safe enough to kind of drink it, right? And then we see things like Flint, Michigan, where the pollution is so bad in the water that it causes cancers throughout the town. And so, I mean, it's just awful. So pollution is there. And you can talk to them and say, look, you know, if we don't solve the pollution problem, we are going to be in very serious trouble. And they say, yeah, I can see that. But I don't believe in climate change. Well, that's fine. Don't believe in climate change, but help us do something about cleaning up the environment or whatever. You know, you see what I'm saying? So you can talk to people like that a little bit differently and maybe perhaps get a different response from people if you bring that up. Just a suggestion to you from your good buddy Uncle Gary here. All right, now, I want to read an article about how important saving the planet is, coming from Benjamin Creme's master. And this article was written and published in Share International, and you can read these articles online at share-international.org. Link is in the description. And there's a tab to the left entitled Articles by the Master. And articles such as this are in there, and you can kind of see what I'm talking about, why it's really gives you a good sense of the ideas and the priorities of these masters, because it's coming from one of these masters. What did he say about saving the planet? When mankind realizes how serious is the ecological imbalance of their planetary home, they must take the steps so urgently needed to remedy the situation. If men were to fail to respond with sufficient resolution, they would be guilty of surrendering the planet to slow but inevitable destruction. What then, the legacy to hand on to their children? That this self-destruction should not prevail, all must act together and make the necessary sacrifices. This will entail a complete change in attitude to the integrity of the planet and what are seen as the needs of men today. It will not be easy for some to countenance the changes needed, but only by such change can the life of the planet be assured. Already, deep inroads have been made into the essential stock of trees on Earth. Deforestation has caused a growing loss of oxygen and the rise of carbon gases. This is now at a critical stage and requires immediate action. The reality of global warming is now dawning on the minds of millions. Yet, despite the overwhelming evidence, some still deny the actions of men are the cause. We, your elder brothers, can say with full conviction that the actions of men are responsible for 80% of global warming. Maitreya, you will find, will not be long in bringing this urgent problem to man's attention. He will face men with the alternatives, the beneficial results of action now on the one hand, and the destruction which would ensue from doing nothing or too little on the other. Thus, the decision is man's alone. When men understand this, they will indeed rally to the cause. They will see that the future for their children depends on action now, and will elicit from Maitreya and his group the necessary steps to take. Maitreya will advocate a simpler form of living, one more in keeping with the reality of the planet's situation. When enough people are convinced that this is necessary, there will be a growing movement to simplify throughout the planet. This will proceed with quite unusual speed. So inspired by the need for change will millions be. Thus will the gravest dangers facing the planet Earth, be somewhat countered. This will encourage many and boost their readiness for further changes. Faced with the dilemma of necessary change, men will come to realize the inevitability of accepting the principle of sharing. Only sharing will make these changes practical and possible. Only through sharing can the bounty of the planet Earth be successfully used. Only through sharing can this bounty be correctly husbanded. Only thus can the planet itself live in harmony with its environment and with its inhabitants. Remember to take action and help SOP save our planet. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again in future videos.